Hey, this is Big Lou. And when I'm on the internet, I'm listening to Jack Dappa Blues.
I'm Dietrich Farr, listening to Jack Dappa Blues.
Hey everybody, this is Adam Gusso.
Hi, I'm Veronica Jackson, America's acoustic folk blues singer. You're listening to Jack Dappa Blues.
Hello, this is Ray Brooks. You're listening to Jack Dappa Blues. Hi, this is Guy Davis.
Hey there, folks. This is Don Fleming, the American songster, slapping the dap with Jack Dappa Blues.
Hey everybody, this is Walter Trout, and you are listening to Jack Dappa Blues.
Hey, this is Shamika Copeland.
Hey, I'm Ben Turner of Piedmont Blues. I'm here with Valerie Turner.
And we are bluesing with Lamont Jack Pearlie, the best radio station for true blues.
Hi, I'm Larry Griffin, and I keep it locked and loaded on Jack Dappa Blues. Yes, yes, yes.
What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, blues people? Welcome to another show, and I'm sitting here with a punk legend, right? and we met on a humble in Russellville, Kentucky, right? Which I'm enamored with Russellville's culture and tradition of Black folk and Black music, just to say the least, and Black historians, which we're going to speak of one soon. But before we get to that, we want to talk about Honeychild Coleman. Now, this is from her website. Started her music career during the hot summer of 1993, busking in the New York City subway system. And trust me, I remember what that was about. From 1998 onward, she is a founding member and organizer of the Sistagrrl Riots, performing experimental electronic music, and more recently, fronting the blues punk outfit, the 1865, which I'm really eager to hear about this project. She has worked with the Slits, Mad Professor, Apollo Heights, The Velt, I hope I said that right, and Badawi Raz Masani, right?
Masonai.
Okay, Masonai, all right. She appeared in the documentaries Afropunk, Fireflies, Getting My Name Up There, and Rock Chicks. I Am Not Female to You. Oh, this is going to be a great conversation. Her songs have been featured in the film and television soundtracks of Pariah. Really? Congratulations. That started a lot of careers. Woke and Everything's Gonna Be All White. Coleman's writing will appear in, you have to say this name for me, for the Black Punk Now. Please say those names. I'm sorry.
James Spooner and Chris L. Terry.
Okay, so now let's just, I want to just jump right into it, okay? Because I'm going to ask you about your upbringing, where you come from, everything that informs you. But before we get to that, I have one major question to start. What is punk rock to someone who says there's not one way to be Black and there's not one way to be a woman?
I always felt that punk rock is the ultimate freedom to be an individual and be yourself, to not try to be like anyone else, try to look like anyone else, not try to sound like anyone else, even though in your community you might have a lot of common interests. For instance, like there are the punk cliches, like you wear studs and you wear black and listen to the same music. But some of the most punk rock people I know look very conservative because it's about your attitude.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so When and what introduced you to punk?
This is a funny story. Um, I was in third grade uh, in Okolona, which is a suburb of Louisville, and I was an avid reader. Like I read the newspaper with my dad every day. One day I opened up the Courier Journal, and there's a full page ad saying, "Don't let your children listen to the Sex Pistols." Right?
Mm.
And I turned to my parents and I'm like, Mama, what's a Sex Pistol? And anytime I was just having this conversation with my brother yesterday, anytime there was something awkward that my parents thought was maybe taboo or they didn't want to like hip us to, my mom was a genius. She would just pretend she didn't know what it was. And when you're really young, you don't question your parents.
Right.
So she's like, I don't know, and just left it at that. But of course, I had to find out. I was like, well, I need to know what this is because there's a full page ad saying don't let people see it. What is this? So maybe a year or two later, I had my own like little transistor radio, and I'd stay up really late at night listening to Rock Over London. So I started to hear all the punk bands that weren't on the radio. Although Louisville's radio is pretty progressive, like we did have the Clash and Blondie and not the Ramones, but Plastic Bertrand. Like we had some random stuff would sneak in. But because I was a nerd, I would just like write down the bands that I like and then go to the library and look for the records because whoever was ordering records for my public library, they were ordering really amazing music. And I could just check out albums from the bookmobile and back then we made tapes. Like I had a portable tape recorder. I'd hold it up to the stereo and make mixtapes. It was so crude. But that's how I got into punk. Um, After that, I remember there was this late night TV talk show. I think the host's name was Tom Hall or and I remember begging my parents, like, hey, I really need to watch this show for my civics class. It was an interview with the Clash.
Wow.
It was like, I know I wouldn't even say the word punk because back then punk had a really bad connotation, as you know, in our community. If you're being punk, you're nothing, you're a low life. So even though I knew punk music was something else, my parents were a different generation, so I couldn't be like, I'm a punk. So, but meanwhile, I loved the Clash. I loved all their lyrics. I remember like going to school one day and I was waiting for homeroom to start, and I sat down in the cafeteria and someone had carved the lyrics to one of their songs into a desk. And I was like, somebody else in my school knows who this is. And I never knew who it was, but I just felt like, okay, I'm not the only one. And
Connection.
so I begged my parents, I was like, can I stay up late? Because I need to watch this interview for my civics class so I can do my report. And I looked that video up, I want to say like a couple of weeks ago. It's on YouTube. Um, so that was my introduction to punk. The first band I really got into besides the Clash was Blondie, but I was also really into rockabilly. And I'm 58, so in the 70s, a lot of those original rock artists were still alive, like Bo Diddley, Chuck
Mm-hmm.
Berry, Ike and Tina Turner. They were all still doing these review tours and playing on like New Year's Rockin' Eve, and so they were just around. So it never seemed strange to me that Black people played rock because clearly they were the originators. Like even watching Happy Days, who did Richie Cunningham love? Fats Domino. He's singing Fats Domino on every episode. So
That's right.
here's this history right in front of us. In my house, my parents let me listen to everything. But then when I leave the house, people were telling me, oh, that's not Black music. So it was really a conflict. And it really annoyed me, for lack of a better description. I was like, why are you lying to me? I see Black people with guitars. Obviously, this is before I really even knew like how deep it went. My dad wasn't so into rock though, and it took me years to realize, like a lot of Black people, because we are innovators, when we create something and it becomes too trendy, we move on to the next thing because
Right.
we want our own thing. We want our own language, our own dialect, our own slang, our own fashion, our own style. we're always evolving and adapting. And, you know, a lot of Black artists got robbed during rock and roll.
Yeah.
And my dad was very bitter about it. So he moved on. And
Was
during
he
the
a
same
musician?
time, he was. I found out later he was a drummer in high school. Um, but during my childhood, he was managing bands. He was managing what we would call show bands,
Wow.
which, you know, like a show band is like an Earth, Wind, and Fire or an Ohio Players, like costumes, funk, horn sections, everything. One of the show bands he managed was my cousin Doug Miller's band, and they were called Third World Edition, and they were
Mm.
from Louisville. Originally, they were called Third World, but then they had to change their name because the Jamaican band Third World blew up and became popular. But they had opened for Earth, Wind, and Fire. They'd opened for a lot of people. My dad, like, he was deep, deep, deep in the Chitlin circuit. So, which, you know, ran from, I want to say Cincinnati down to, I don't even know how far south, but for us, a pit stop was in Russellville. So,
Right.
um, I spent every summer of my life in Russellville until maybe age 15.
Oh wow.
So I have like extreme music filled memories of the town. And a big part of that is my cousin, Michael Morrow, who is also a historian, because he, one, sang in choir, which, you know, it's like a Black tradition, but he also really loved music and was always tapped in to new Black music. Like I remember being at my grandmother's house with the record player on the porch and
Wow.
him coming up the steps with some 45s and playing them and showing us the dances and teaching us lyrics. And I was in first grade, maybe. I don't even, actually, I wasn't even in school yet because we still lived near Russellville then. So that's really my childhood. Just being around music all the time, I took it for granted, to be honest. I didn't start out as a musician at all, but I just assumed like, uh, everybody listened to music and everybody had somebody in their family that could play. And I also assumed everybody drew and was a visual artist because everybody in my house did that. So once I started going to school, it was a big rude awakening of like, oh, you don't do that in your house? What do you do? Like I was shocked. So
So let me
that's how
ask
it
you,
started.
what,
Hmm.
because you mentioned this a couple of times, so I had to write this down because cultural reference is very important, cultural understanding, right? And man, you just evoked memories of my childhood when you described what the word punk meant in our community.
Yes.
So now but there's this music that actually functions and starts like how hip hop starts, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
so what was that like? What was it like? Maybe not your family, but your age group, people, you know, outside the house, or Black folk, how did they respond? And then at what point did you find Bad Brains and these other Black, or a band called Death and these other folk?
Sure. I can't even pretend to rewrite history. It was rough being a Black girl in, because also my parents, when we moved out of like the Russellville, Allensville area, because it was time for me to go to school, um, initially we lived in Newburgh, which was a traditional historic Black neighborhood in Louisville. So I went to first grade there, and then I also went to first grade in the West End. So again, in addition to being in Russellville, which in my mind has always been a Black city, like I didn't know any white people in Russellville most of my life. We moved to this Black kind of utopia within Louisville, and then we're in the West End, which is also Black. So I had no interaction with white people. Therefore, I had no interaction with anyone telling me I wasn't Black or Black
Hmm,
enough until I was in a mixed environment. And
really?
once uh, we moved to the suburbs, when it was time for me to go to second grade, we actually were in an all white school for the first time. So where we lived in Okolona at that time, there was like maybe two other Black families around our suburb, but they didn't live in the subdivision we lived in. We would see them at school. Um, And it was okay. Like nothing seemed out. The only thing that seemed a little odd for me, again, as like a kid who had never really lived around white people before, was like, oh, okay, well, they live a little differently, but we're all still basically listening to the same music. Like nothing's odd until the next year when busing started. Now, the thing about Kentucky to me that's so, I learned this later in life, like, I didn't realize we were behind in desegregating our schools. Like everybody else had been desegregated, what, 10 years earlier. Here we are, 1975, 76, and we're just now desegregating public schools. And so it became very murky because a lot of the white kids and families we had been friends with suddenly had issue with us because we didn't have to be bused because we were Black and we were already living in the white school district. But their kids had to be bused to the Black schools. So then the racism came out.
Wow.
So then like half of our friends cut us off. The Klan was around. Like it was a real tense time for a couple of years easily. And then the Black, while that was happening, I was thinking, you know, because I loved the Black schools that I went to, and I really wasn't happy to be in the suburbs. I liked being in the city. I liked being able to walk. I liked the independence. Even though I was really young, I just felt like I'm a city person. Why are we here? You know, not knowing like, oh, my parents wanted us to be in a better school. I was angry. So punk was wonderful for that. But also I was envious. I was like, can we be bused to the school? Because I want to go back to my old friends. And my parents are like, no, we moved here so you can go to this school. So like that didn't make no kind of sense to me as a third grader. I was not having it. And then so the Black kids that got bused to our school weren't happy either, because they're looking at us like, who do you think you are living in the suburbs? That's number one.
Right.
Then they're like, oh, well, you must think you're white because you live here. So that's number two, which I'd never experienced in my life. And I'm like, I don't understand this. And then three, I had like, my dad had a dialect that I never heard anybody else speak, because I think some of his family was from Tennessee. So I had it too. So they made me go to speech class. So my speech changed. And so, of course, I was made fun of. Like, oh, you talk white. Like all those stereotypical things that kids hear adults say and then bully other kids with.
Right.
So that was happening at the exact same time when I was discovering punk, even though I was, what, a third grader.
Wow.
And I was just obsessed with music anyway, and I was shy and I was kind of a loner, and I was just be in my room listening to music and drawing. So somehow that was my raft to get through it. And I remember like once I discovered Blondie, even though they blew up for disco music, because I'm a nerd, whenever I like a band, I go backwards to see what else they did. So I went to the library, I found all their old stuff. I didn't know about CBGBs yet, but I knew they were doing some other like weird 50s sounding music.
Right.
So then I knew how to sew. So I started altering my clothes to dress like Blondie as a sixth grader and a fifth grader, like pegging my pants when nobody was wearing peg pants.
Wow.
Like, you don't even know. I don't know how, like, no one threatened to beat me up, but it was rough. Like I was ridiculed on the daily. Like, oh, she's got her cuffs, like her cuffed jeans, and she's wearing high waters and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I'm like, Blondie's the greatest artist ever, and I just want to be like her. Like I made my parents buy me saddle shoes because of the cover of one of their albums. Like I was obsessed.
But
and
I mean that is a band to be obsessed with. She's like one of the first people to rap on a record.
Exactly. And when that happened, like I was following it all. And when hip hop was happening too, I was into it. And I felt very conflicted because the mean kids liked hip hop. So I didn't want to let them know that I liked it too. Like in my house, I could be myself, but at school, I'd be like, I'm not going to let them know that I'm enjoying this because I'm not like them.
Right.
And that's a whole thing too, because living in the suburbs, it's not that I ever thought I was better. It's just there's this separation. And once people push you, you're just like, well, maybe we are different. You start to
Right.
believe it. So there was a lot of that going on. But it always felt weird because, like me with my brothers, with my cousins, whoever in the house, we were just ourselves.
Right.
But we had to have this guard as soon as we went to school. And music really was what got me through it all, to be honest. Um, so yeah, that was all happening, what, third grade to high school, pretty
Wow.
much.
I mean, that's the most informative. So it's informative, take out the I, informative years of a person's life this is happening. So
Yeah.
so let me ask you this. So when I say internal, black on black cultural wars, if you will, right? Because that's black on
Yeah.
black crime. How,
Sure.
what, and then you have KKK and other things happening. How were the white students treating you? Considering, I would imagine most people at this time in this community thought that punk rock or punk period was a white cultural expression.
Well, at that time, I'll say pre high school times, because things
Okay.
changed for me in high school.
Okay.
I wasn't in an environment where people even knew about punk because I was in a southern suburban, uh, working to lower middle class environment where at the time, classic rock was huge. Every, Everybody listened to disco because we all roller skated. So again, there's this commonality,
Right.
and all the music you hear at the roller skating rink, it's black and white. It's Heat Wave, it's the Commodores, it's everything. Um, but none of those people were tapped into punk. And I remember I call it the Homer Simpson, where you give somebody the gift that you really want. And
Yeah.
my best friend in sixth grade, for her birthday, because I spent all my money on records pretty much. I gave her some record that I really wanted for myself. I was like, well, she'll like the song too, and I'll go to her house and listen to it. And I remember her saying, "Oh yeah, I'm not really into music." And I looked at her so differently from then on. I felt sad for her. Like, you're not into music. What? Like, who are you? I thought we were best friends. Like, I was just like, who is this person? I don't understand. They're an alien. Um, and then I just thought, like, okay, I didn't realize like how obsessed I was with it, but also I just didn't know anyone around me that listened to such a crazy mix and was
Right.
curious and looking for things. Like, I remember 2020 did a segment on the new wave, because in America, like, I learned this again later, because punk had such a bad connotation, they rebranded it as new wave to make it acceptable.
Okay.
And then they say the difference between punk and new wave is that the new wavers they had money. They had money to buy the good synthesizers and
Right.
better clothes, and they lived comfortable lives, and punks were poor. So I learned this later on, but I related to punk because you didn't need money to be cool. You just needed an imagination and camaraderie. And we never called ourselves punks, like me and my best friend Janet, we took art classes together. We always said we were art punks because we were artists first who loved punk, but we were really new wavers. And I mean, looking back, we were extremely punk, but there was no one around us to compare it to. We were just like doing what we could. But yeah, that's how it started for me. I remember like ninth grade, I was trying really hard to be quote unquote normal and like trying to dress like all the kids in my school and straightening my hair and like just trying to be like really plain. And I just felt so out of place. And then something happened that summer where I was like, I'm not gonna even curl my hair anymore. I'm just gonna wear a ponytail like Sade and like just be and wear black. And I don't know how I found so many black clothes because again, it's the 80s where everybody's wearing day glow and pink and all this. And I remember
Right.
like the first day of school, just going to school in all black and I didn't know what a goth was. I was just like trying to be inward and feeling like, well, why am I bothering? Like, these people don't like me anyway. Why am I trying to look like them? I just had like this weird epiphany that summer. And then ever since then, I just kind of didn't care what popular kids did. Even though I was very active in school in a lot of ways, I wasn't trying to be liked. I felt like the people who would understand what I was interested in weren't there. So I just had my eyes set on getting out. Like college and where am I going to go? And I thought I was going to go to California first, but I ended up coming to New York.
Right, which makes so much sense. The way New York was a cultural, I don't want to say melting pot, but I think you understand. What strikes me amazing, a young person, first of all, that initial experience at third grade might answer my question, because in ninth grade, you had the wherewithal to be like, bump all these people. I'm comfortable with who I am, and I'm going to do all these things while I find my tribe. How did you, what, how did this maturity just come from the inside? Was it family? I guess, where did it come from?
Uh, I think that I'm not 100% sure. If I think about different events that happened, like I call my ninth grade summer, that's when I like really kind of rebelled against, my parents were very strict, and I had this really wild friend who I started like going to parties with where you had no business going. And like I got grounded for the first time in my life, and I like dated the wrong boy from the wrong part of the suburbs or whatever. And I just thought, like, I just looked around and I'm like, this isn't really the life I want. Like, I don't want to fail in school, and I don't want to just party, and I don't want to. And also, I tried all these things because I was curious, but I was bored, and I felt like there's something else out there for me. Um, and then, like, I felt like every conservative situation I tried to put myself in, it was almost like I was acting, but I was a bad actor. Like, I remember one of my friends was like, I mean, her family had money, my family did not, but because I had really good grades, I got invited to be a debutante, which is such a Southern thing. I try to explain it to people like, okay, first you have meetings, it's a club, and then, there's a ball that you go to and your parents come. And like at the time, my boyfriend was in the ROTC, so he's going to be in uniform, and it's a whole thing. And all I could think was like, I don't like these people. I like my friend, but I don't have anything in common with them. Like they're just talking about shopping and they're all rich and I'm not. And like I'm an artist and I want to talk about other things. So I went to like a handful of those meetings, and then also I just felt like my parents are not gonna shell out for this. Like, what am I doing? Like, this isn't the best use of my time. And then my uncle Charlie actually knew that I was interested in photography, and he gave me this little Instamatic camera, and I started taking photos. And then my cousin Antonio, who you met him, he's also cousins with Michael. He had a Minolta camera that he had bought while he was in the Navy, and he loaned it to me for like a year. So I started taking a photography class. And then I realized, like, oh, if I go to art school, there are all these things that I can learn that I'm super interested in. I was already studying French. I loved world history. I loved liberal arts. I liked talking about politics. I just felt like all the interest I had as far as growing as a person and knowledge, none of them matched a conservative path. And it just, something in me was like, well, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I know it's not here.
Right.
And my best friend at the time, she was a year older, so she was going to Murray State. I went and spent a week with her to see if I liked it because they were offering me something. And I'm like, this is cool, but it's cool because I'm not home. But is it
Right.
enough? Is it interesting enough? And I was like, yeah, no, I think I need to go somewhere else. And then I don't know, I just saw a bunch of films. Like I saw Liquid Sky and Smithereens and whatever else was on Night Flight, like one day we were just hanging out at Jefferson Mall, and I was like, I think I need to go to New York. It's not California. Like something tells me New York is where I need to go. So I applied to one school, and I didn't even know I was accepted until 2 weeks before school started. I spent
Wow.
the whole summer in limbo of like, I don't know if this doesn't happen. I got to figure out how I'm going to get there. Like if they don't accept me, I'm just going to move there anyway and work my way in. Like I was just on a mission. So,
Wow. So before we get to the New York experiences, I have one. I don't say last, but I would say, for lack of better, last before we segue, because the part of Kentucky in the South that we're talking about, this is considered the Bible Belt, correct?
oh yes.
So I don't want you don't have to go answer as much as you're comfortable answering, right? But
hmm
how is the you use the term conservative? I don't know if everyone has the same understanding of that word, but for me, tradition, church, these different things and other things, but to get to my point, that's what church comes into it when it comes to conservative.
It
Um,
could. I mean, my upbringing in Russellville definitely had church played a factor in it. I would go to church with my grandmother and my cousins all the time. And even though my parents weren't particularly religious, I think they enjoyed the fact that I was interested in it. Um, and it just seemed like a community thing more than anything at all. The thing about growing, I mean, I didn't grow up in Russellville per se, but I was born there. Me, my dad, and my grandfather were all born in the same hospital in Russellville. So I had that like
wow.
family lineage pride feeling of like, oh, this is our town. And everywhere like me and my cousins would walk around, the elders knew our family. They're like, oh, you're so and so's son, you're so and so's granddaughter. Like they knew everything about our family. And that's like such a rare feeling. I mean, it's the opposite of my life in Louisville where no one knew us.
Hmm.
So, knowing that, like having that as a foundation and coming back to that every summer and coming back to like being able to hang out with my cousins and run the streets and go to people's houses, like it's a traditional feeling for sure. Um, I never felt stifled in Russellville. I never felt like those same social rules were put on me the way they were when we moved to the suburbs. That was just a whole different thing. And maybe it's also a city pace of life. Um, in a strange way, I felt like our small town life was a little more accepting because it was just so community based and people knew us. Whereas the city is more competitive, there's just a lot more going on. Um, but when I talk about conservative, like specifically the neighborhood where I grew up, there was no edge. Like maybe the edgiest thing happening was kids got into heavy metal. That was huge. They didn't
Right.
get into it the way like LA or New Jersey. Like, yes, guys had long hair, but you didn't see guys in makeup. It wasn't that extreme. They weren't in it like that deep. But they would go see bands where the guys had makeup on. Nobody had any like weird feelings about them. But but they were definitely a little threatened by my friends who were looking a little more punk in a little new wave. Like that was a bit of a threat to their masculinity sometimes. Um, and don't
Now, where is this at?
in Okolona or in
Okay.
Louisville in the suburbs. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, there were some moments. In general, like once I did find my tribe of friends in high school, it definitely became more fun. But we also just knew like it's not forever because high school isn't forever. But we protected each other because that's what you do, you know.
Right. Okay. So then now you're in got to New York. So now what school is this? And
Parsons School of Design.
oh wow.
Yeah.
So wait, are you performing during high school?
No, I was only a visual artist and designing clothes. That was my career path.
Uh-huh. So let's jump around a bit. Where
Sure.
did the performance aspect of Honeychild Coleman come to materialize?
I was in denial about my love for music for many years. And because I never saw, like, I knew one Black woman who played guitar my whole life. She was in one of the bands that my dad managed. And, but I didn't know any Black women in rock, let alone punk, anything else. On TV, you'd see like the bass player, the waitresses was Black. Oh, that's cool. Annabella is not Black of Bow Wow, but we claimed her because she was brown. And there wasn't a lot of representation. My only representation for real was Tina Turner. But at the same time, that's like my parents' generation. So I didn't, even though I loved singing and I was in chorus for many years and I played clarinet for a bit, once I really got deep into visual art, I just kind of put music to the side, but it's something I did at home just for myself. I never talked about it. My brothers all had guitars. Sometimes like my brother Al would be like, "Oh, you're going out to play baseball. Can I play your guitar? Do you mind?" And I'd just be in his room teaching myself songs, but I didn't think anything of it. It was just like something I did when I had some free time. So fast forward to even living in New York, I didn't think about music that way. Although, again, I spent all my money on records, like equally as much as clothes, whatever. But I ended up moving to the Bay Area for a while, and that's when I got into music.
Hmm. You know, I hear a lot about particularly Black folk moving to the Bay Area and then beginning this, I guess, trajectory in music. Why is that for you, at least?
Uh, I went there on a whim with my ex-boyfriend on vacation, and we were there. I mean, I don't want to give you the whole long story, but long story short, I ended up staying, and music was just everywhere. Like on Sunday night, we would go to Eli's Mile High Club and see the most amazing blues bands ever, and sometimes James Brown might pop in or whoever. Tower of Power from Oakland. There was just like this rich love of blues and funk and 60s music, forget it. Um, I grew up around blues all the time because that was my dad's favorite music, but I didn't really understand it until I got there.
Mm.
And a lot of things about Oakland reminded me of Louisville, which I think part of it is because a lot of people migrated from the South and stayed, and a little
Right.
bit of the dialect feels a little bit like home. Um, the love of barbecue. There's just like certain aspects that felt very Southern to me, even though it was California, and it really surprised me. Um, I also felt like, on top of that, the deep history of activism, the Black Panthers, there are all these things that I'd read about or heard about, and suddenly I saw them all kind of meshing together. Um, the way I got into music was kind of an accident because I was working in a vintage store, like a clothing store, and with two other women, and we had a record player in the store, like under the counter, because vinyl hadn't died yet. And you just put on a record and you're steaming clothes, and we're all singing and harmonizing just for fun, because that's what you do when you're at work. And then one of my friends was like, "Hey, I'm gonna have a birthday party soon, and I'm renting out a studio. Will you guys come and sing with me?" And nobody had asked me in my adult life to sing ever. So I was like, "Oh, sure, that sounds fun. Let's do it." And we started practicing and learned some songs. And then suddenly people started asking us to sing at protests. And we
What?
became an a cappella trio, right? So I was like, this is so cool. Like, it reminded me of like being little with my parents and marching, like, oh, but
Yes.
it's our generation doing it now. Like, we're protesting like the Gulf War and different things. And
Wow.
from that scene, somehow some other friends of ours were like, "Oh, we heard that you guys sing. Do you want to sing backup vocals for this funk band?" And so we did that a little bit, but that band was like, uh, I don't remember what happened to them, to be honest. Like, they were really popular, but somehow it didn't quite gel. But then my neighbor was like, "Oh, forget those guys. You can be the lead singer in our band. Don't sing backup. Come and sing with us. And that was my friend Tony, and he had a disco cover band when disco wasn't popular again. This is like at
Wow.
the height of grunge, and like all this other stuff is happening.
In the Bay Area now, because
in
this
the
is
Bay
where
Area,
grunge is birthed.
in Oakland. And I had a shaved head, right? So I'd wear like an afro wig, and like, because we worked in the vintage store, we had access to like 70s and 60s clothing, and then I was making
Wow.
costumes, and it was really funny. I was like, I feel like, I mean, there was no language to say cosplaying then, but I felt like I was cosplaying as a band that my dad would manage.
Right.
It was hilarious, but it was really fun. And it wasn't so serious that I had any kind of like fear of performing. Um, and we played like dormitories, like dorm parties. One of our favorite gigs we did, we played in a laundromat, and we just
Really?
like set up the gear and we performed on top of like the dryers. And just because we could, because it was like a Tuesday night, no one's gonna come in. So I played with that band for a long time, and then I'm still hanging out with my friend that I did backup vocals with, and we're driving around, like going to shows and stuff. And one day, my friend's like, I think you should play guitar. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she goes, because, we're in the car, we're singing, me and her name's Lisa, and our other friend was Tambourine. But like, we're singing the lyrics, but you're singing the guitar parts. And I'm like, what?
Right.
Like, I wasn't even aware. They're like, yeah, you're singing lead guitar parts. You're not even singing lyrics. And I'm like, oh, I guess I should learn guitar. So then she gave me my first guitar,
Wow.
and I just started teaching myself. So that's how I got into music. Once I started learning to play and writing songs, I was still deep into fashion then, like I was making hats and stuff, but it took over, and I just slowly stopped designing clothing and just got more into that. Um, and we ended up singing in another group too together for a while. We actually performed at the first, before Lollapalooza. Perry Farrell had this other festival called the Gathering of the Tribes, and we performed there with this a cappella group. It was our friend Sebastian's band. They were called Endangered Species, and they were super political. It was 3 vocals, 2 acoustic guitars. We were singing samples like a record scratching. It was so like out there, super challenging, very like avant music.
Mm.
So that's how I got into music. And then from then on, I was just like, okay, I guess I should learn how to sing properly so I don't lose my voice, because I'm singing at parties all the time. So then I started taking voice classes.
Makes sense. So wait, because there's there's a lot to unpack here, because you've made mention in multiple moments this idea of performing at protests, making socially conscious songs, and then you're in like one of the ground zeros of not only just Black consciousness but revolution.
Yeah.
And you just kind of, I mean, well, let's not ease over the fact that you were marching as a kid. So there's so many nuances to this story that you're kind of by the waying me. Are you well, I don't want to say are you are you know what? Let's talk about this band here. 1865. The reason why I'm jumping
Sure.
to that,
Yeah.
because I mean, punk is, to me, well, I think most music, particularly cultural music that comes out of what people label a subculture, for me, it's always political and social.
Yeah.
So we could just start there. But 1865, and what I'm understanding, and I want you to share with us, and all of the musics that you do, actually, because you do a lot, but it seems like a culmination of these things that you shared so far. Am I in the ballpark?
Yeah, pretty much. Sasha Jenkins, he's my bandmate, and we pretty much write all the music together. We were trying to do a project together for a while, and Sasha is a history he would say he's a history nerd. He loves history. He loves research. He loves telling stories about where we've been and where we're going. And that's something he's been doing in his writing from Ego Trip to his other magazine that he had before that, and in all the films and documentaries that he makes. So him, like, I met him officially when he had come to Pianos one night when I was playing guitar with Apollo Heights. And um, I was extremely awkward, and I think I've apologized to Sasha multiple times, but like he was trying to talk to me, but I was really out of it. And he wanted to talk about instruments, which is great because most dudes at shows aren't that focused. They don't want to talk about music and gear and nerd out with you. You know, they're on like another level, but he wasn't like that. So, and I had a lot of respect for him as well. And we had jammed together and done some like rough recording, and we'd always run into each other over the years. And I always tell the story like, two of the best bands I ever had in my life, all the band members met at a Band Brain show. So the first time I saw the Bad Brains, it was when they were still the Soul Brains. I don't know if you remember that phase when they got signed to Madonna's label and they changed their name because of publishing situations, but they were doing full concerts as the Bad Brains. And I'm at that show and I see my friend Damali floating crowd surfing. He's a drummer. I knew him from like Tamar Kali and a bunch of friends. And then I also see my friend Dominic there. And I'm like, oh, like the next week we started a band.
Wow.
So fast forward to 2017, and I'm at the OK Player space because there's a Bad Brains show, and Daryl Jennifer, he's also a painter, which I didn't know. So it was an exhibition of Daryl's paintings, and then the Bad Brains were playing. And it was like so packed, you could barely see anyone, but I ran into Sasha at that show. And then a week later, he called me and asked me if I wanted to start a band with him. So I feel like the Bad Brains have been a good catalyst in my life. Oh, I forgot the first Bad Brains story though, which is my friend George Pabon, aka oh my God, I'm spacing out on his name. Um, this is horrible. Give me 1 second. George and I worked at this art supply store called Pearl Paint, and Fable. It's Fable. He is a famous pop master breakdancer. He's in Beat Street. I met him in the elevator at Parsons.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, he looks so incredible. I knew who he was because I'd seen the movie because my brother Al loved that movie and he recited it to me verbatim the night he saw it in the theater. So we started talking and I was like, wow, he's really down to earth. And he's just telling me like, you know, how he's adapting to being in the school because I was having a hard time because I'd never been around so many rich people in my life. And, you know, I'm coming straight out of high school. So we're kind of trading stories and we keep crossing paths. Suddenly we're both working at this art supply store. And one day he comes to work and he's like, I got this tape for you. And he made me a mixtape of the Bad Brains. So one side was the Bad Brains, Eye Against Eye, the whole album. The other side was HR's solo reggae stuff.
Wow.
I put that tape in my boombox and it changed my life. Because I knew who the Bad Brains were a little. I'd never seen a photo of them, but I'd heard their music in some movies. And I'm like, oh, this is new Black punk. This is us. I remember like trying to dread my hair then. It didn't work, but I was like, all right, I understand my mission now. It was like my first year at art school. I'm ready. So fast forward, I'm at the show. I see Sasha, and then he's like, yeah, I'm working on this project. And this is like Trump had been in office a few months, obviously. Things are starting to be a little awry. And he's like, well, you know, there's all these white bands doing blues rock. How come Black people aren't doing it? And I'm like, couldn't agree more. And he's like, you know, there's the Black Keys, there's the White Stripes, there's this, there's that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm down. And then we talked about the themes, about just what the whole project would be about. Like we just kind of brainstormed a bit. And I just started writing right away. He sent me some riffs he recorded with his phone. We started trading stuff back and forth. In 2 weeks, we had about 8 songs written and played our first show.
Wow.
So yeah, the chemistry and the intent just were in alignment. And in my experience creatively, when that happens, it's not even like you're forcing it. You're just like, okay, I'm up. Here's my tea. Time to get crack-a-lackin'. Like you're just
Right.
doing it because you feel it. There's a momentum happening. And that's how that whole album and project kind of came into play. I mean, Sasha had been jamming with Chuck Treese, the drummer, for a while. And I think originally he thought that Chuck would sing, but Chuck didn't want to sing and play drums, even though Chuck's got a great voice and, he's McRad, he's a great songwriter. And then he thought of me and he thought of the stuff that we had done. So it really worked. And it's been great. It's been a pleasure, like working on that kind of creative level.
Yeah, so,
and also just the mission, like you're doing
okay,
something
there we
with
go.
someone that's so intense, and there's no, like, I remember, like, especially when I was writing Peggy, which is a true story about Margaret Gardner.
Really?
That
Do you want
story
to
was
play
so
it?
relatable. Yeah, you could play it.
Okay, so we're gonna play a little bit of it, and
Mhm.
then I want you to tell us the story.
Sure.
All right, we're playing Peggy, y'all, from 1865, right?
Yep.
Those days snatched her back into a slave from across the frozen brown river, even though she'd already been free. Same age as Ian Curtis, only about 5'3", with a scar on the left side of her forehead and cheek. When the judge asked how this came to be, Peggy said, "A white man done struck me." Coldest winter in 60 years, frozen tears as she drifted in ice water. Afterthoughts of the butcher knife she took to the throat of her own daughter. Took damn near 500 deputy recruits to try and maintain some kind of order. But who could say she had no right? Who could blame her? Send them children back to God. Uh-huh. Through proud and gritted tears, Peggy said, "A white man done struck me."
So there's so many things we have to unpack here, and forgive me that the volume wasn't up in the beginning of the tune. Your voice is great.
Thank you.
Let's start there. Okay, we will discuss your artistry after you give us the story of Peggy.
Okay. Peggy's real name was Margaret Garner. She had escaped to freedom in Ohio. So immediately I'm invested because I grew up near the Ohio River. I was like, okay, I get this. Somebody ratted her out, and her owners found out where she was. So they captured her and they were bringing her back to Kentucky to put her back in bondage. And she didn't want her kids to know slavery, so she threw them overboard. Yeah. So when she gets back to Kentucky, they try to put her on trial, and they don't know whether to put her on trial for destruction of property because we weren't people, or for escaping. Like, it was very complex. What happened later, which isn't in the story, is she did end up, I think her owner was trying to keep her out of jail for destruction of property, but he still wanted to hold her in bondage. So he kept transferring her to different plantations so the law couldn't find her
Mm-hmm.
because she was more valuable to him as a slave instead of punishing her for destruction of
Wow.
property. Yeah. So yeah, that song, it's one of the heaviest songs I've ever written in my life, probably. Um, and it's, throwing in the line about Ian Curtis, Joy Division, so people understand she was young, because when you think of like the way that people talk about, say, a Harriet Tubman or any revolutionary slave who found some kind of emancipation, we don't think of them as young people. There's this vision of them
Right.
being old and on the chair and with the shawl.
Right.
And it's like, no, they were young and full of life and fighting for theirs. And I remember there was an illustrator that we were working with when we were working on the album, because the album has a coloring book. And when he came to us with the drawing of Peggy, she looked too harsh for me. And, he had drawn a scar and she looked too beat down by life. And something in my heart was like, she wasn't there yet. At this point, she was in her prime. She was a young mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that harshness came later. So that wasn't how I wanted to visually portray her.
Right.
So I actually didn't draw Peggy. I drew the judge in
Wow.
the book. Yeah.
Wow.
But this album also brought me out of illustration retirement, because I had a conversation with Sasha after I saw it, and I was like, I feel really bad. He's a great artist, but this isn't it. And he's like, you know how to draw, just draw the characters. You wrote them. And then I literally spent New Year's Day of 2018 illustrating all those people.
Wow. Wow.
So there's a lot of symbolism that happened with creating this work. But yeah, there's another song we wrote called Buttermilk. And it was about how the slave owner's wife is jealous of the slave who he's keeping as a mistress.
Right.
And that was also very deep to write. And I illustrated that one. I illustrated the slave owner's woman. I illustrated the mistress and the children who looked alike, but one was black and one's white. I went in. So this project really, I didn't want it to be superficial. I wanted all the characters to have some kind of realness to them. And I really read a lot as I was writing the songs, and also just thinking about the illustrations. I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, just to really focus on the history of, the whole idea was, what was life like for us when we were officially emancipated? Because it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
What were the different stories? How did that work? And I thought about my cousin Michael a lot, and this is before I even knew about the Sikh Museum, because he always, always, always talked about history my whole life. He's the first person I knew to use the word Pan-Africanism. He had me making red, black, and green beads for him in grade school. Like, he was on it. So he's about that life. And I was like, I don't even know if he understands that his influence on me as a child is the reason I was able to write like this and really like think this way. Yeah. So that's what happened with 1865.
Full circle.
Full circle for real. And to be able to have this outlet to talk about things in real time is a gift.
What before we move to your next project, the book, why that name 1865? What evoked that to be, like you guys love history and all these things, but you never really told us what the conversation was that was like, this is what we're going to grapple with and tackle.
I think, the name was Sasha's idea, and I feel like it came up because, remember, during Trump's first term, there were some jokes going around about bringing slavery back, even then, right? So, the backlash and the ripples really began with Obama's first term, and it came
Right.
to a head when Trump really got elected. This is before Proud Boys, before all that. Just to think about, how are we going to get through this? What have we already gotten through? And to reflect upon like the history of this country that the far right want to act like never happened. And this again is before the whole critical race theory thing even blew up.
Right.
Like they were
Right.
already trying to shut it down then. So, I grew up, I don't know, like, I don't remember where you told me you grew up, but I remember going to school. I certainly saw my share of rebel flags, and I certainly heard enough people who should have known better saying, well, slavery's over.
Right.
Everything's fine now. And it's
Right.
like, everything's not quite fine, and we need to learn this. So it's so intense that we felt an inkling to talk about these things, whereas now teachers can't even talk about it.
Right.
Like we didn't
Right.
even see it coming this extreme, but something just felt like we need to talk about this
Right.
with
Right.
music. It's a public service announcement with guitars, as Joe Strummer would say. So,
I like that. I like that.
yeah, it's it's almost foreshadowing in a really strange way. Like, yeah, Sasha sent me a text on the last election day saying, well, I guess it's time for us to make another album. And I'm like, yeah, because we already made songs that aren't on this album. Like we have a song about ICE. We have a song about all the police brutality in Texas. We have other
Mm.
songs that talk about things that have been happening since this
Right.
album
Right.
dropped.
Right.
So it's unfortunate, but it's necessary, is the only way I can see it. And I feel very thankful that I'm able to have this outlet of music, because pretty much most every project I'm in has some kind of political edge to it. This is the most extreme and the most known, but they all have it.
Right.
And I'm happy, although it's a bittersweet happiness, that to have comrades creatively who are on board with the agenda of talking about real things.
Right. Right. So now, talking about real things, there's a book that you have sitting there. Could you show it to us and talk to us about this book?
Yes. This is nonfiction, fiction, and comic anthology, Black Punk Now, curated by James Spooner, who most everyone knows as the creator of the Afropunk film, preceding what is now known as the festival, and Chriselle Terry. Um, I I came to be involved in this book in a real happenstance way. I was writing a novel. Uh, I worked on it for a while, and then it sat in storage for 10 years. Like
Mm.
I worked on it up until I went on a 3-month solo tour of Europe in 2012, and then I never looked at it again.
Mm.
But when I started to look at it, um, I wanted to do some readings, and the Velt, Danny and Daniel Chavis, who I was in Apollo Heights with, they were curating a festival called Bazaar Noir in North Carolina at the Core Museum. They're like, do you want to come down and play First Friday? And I'm like, well, I would love to. Can I do a reading? And they're like, yeah, do whatever you want. So I conjured this show that's half reading, half music. And I printed out a prototype of my book just to get an idea visually what it's going to look like, with just photos. And then I hand wrote pieces of the stories in it. So there's a photo of me reading from the book during the show. And James Spooner saw that photo and wrote me and said, oh, I didn't know you were a writer. Do you want to write something for Black Punk Now? So I was like, oh, but I've never worked with an editor before. This is just me like getting started. So I took that as a sign that it's time for me to like focus on that a bit. and also not be afraid to share the writing with someone. And I started to send Chris and James some of the writings that I'd done. They picked out what they thought would make sense with how the anthology was curated and worked on it for about a year before the book came out. Leading up to the actual print of the book, I did a lot of readings. And I used to have a salon called the Jaded Lovers Sunday Salon, where people would read poetry and do music. So I rekindled that to get my teeth together again to do readings in public.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happened with Black Punk Now. Last March, we actually did an official reading of it at the Center for Fiction in Brooklyn, and that was
Nice.
really exciting.
Nice. So talk to us about this title, Black Punk Now, and then what is it that you wrote for, or did you write the entire thing?
No, I wrote a short story in it. It's actually named after one of my songs. The song is called Echelon. So my story is My Echelon Summer, and it is based on true events. I changed names, of course, but it really illustrates a moment in time, specifically in New York, and all the adventures one can go through in like 48 hours.
Got it.
So my character in my story is based on me. Like, it's during a time when I had a regular DJ residency in Manhattan with my friend who's another woman DJ, the things we went through, party hopping, the different friends we had, and just how it all kind of melded together. When I first started to show people pieces of the writing, I actually showed some of it to Danny and Daniel, and they're like, you have to do this because no one's telling these stories from a Black girl's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it never occurred to me because I'm reading all kinds of things. I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Okay, let me go back and look at it. And it's not like I sat down with a Black agenda. I just, again, I take it for granted because of my community and my circle of friends. I take it for granted that more people are this way because it's been my experience here. It's not so much in Berkeley. Like, two of my really good friends there, one of them I actually met in New York, my friend Lisa Grayson. I met her also at Pearl Paint. And we used to do this thing called Count the Black Girls, where we would go out and be like, okay, it's you, it's me, and oh, there's two more. Like, that was our thing. Like, we need to take up space. We got to show up. How many Black girls were there besides us? And she still does it. Like, she told me recently, like, yeah, sometimes I just go to things to take up space so people know, like, I'm here. And I love that. But I feel like the friends that I've made in these subcultures and communities and scenes, this is, it sounds crazy on paper, but this really is life. You might be sitting at home eating ramen one day, and then suddenly you're at some crazy VIP party drinking free champagne. That's just life.
Yes,
it's not like you set out to have that day. It's just what happens. So, like in part of my story, after I'm done DJing, I end up going to see my friend, and what will often happen in some small venues is if you know the people working, you get locked into the club. So the gate comes down, but you're still there with like the DJ and your friends until the sun comes up. So that happens in the story too, because that's normal. So, it's like something that maybe if people read it, they're like, oh, you're making it up. It's not that fabulous. Or that's like a movie thing. I'm like, no, that's just working class New York nightlife. In nightlife,
Right.
You go to bed at 8 a.m. It's not that you're doing anything. It's just that's the schedule you're on. So
Right.
having this kind of rebellious young Black woman in the book who has a lot of elements of me, moving through these different scenes, I took it for granted because I just know other sisters like that, but apparently we're not so common. So
right. First, I can't wait to read it. Secondly, I want to put this back up here because we're about to come to a close, but I need you to explain this statement. I mean, it's self-explanatory, but I would like
Sure.
you to define it because it is your statement, and I don't want, myself included, anyone interpreting what this means to you.
Sure. I mean, you know, as a Black American, we're not a monolith as people. And even in the Black punk scene or the Black art scene or whatever scene you're in, we're all kinds of things. I think someone who doesn't have that sensitivity just assumes, oh yeah, you're Afro-punk, you're this, you're that. And there's not one way to be. Like being Black isn't one thing, the same way being white or Asian or any other ethnicity isn't one thing. I remember I tell this story a lot, but I was taking a cab from a gig one day and the cab driver was like, "Oh, what's in your case? Is that a keyboard?" And I'm like, "No, it's a guitar." And he's like, "Oh, what do you play? Jazz?" And I'm like, "No, I play rock and roll." He's like, "Rock and roll, what do you want to be? Like the next Tina Turner?" And I'm like, "Well, if that means being rich and having a castle in France, yes, I would love to be the next Tina Turner. Bring it on." Like she's amazing. She's doing her thing. And a lot of people don't look at someone like that as a rebel, but I totally do. Like seeing that as a kid, knowing like, oh, she's up there, she's free, before all the other stories we knew.
Right, right.
I think that I've been in spaces where people expect me to represent Black people, which if they knew my life story, they'd be like, no, she's not the one to ask. But if you don't know and you assume all Black people have the same experience, you're going to say something ignorant like that.
Right.
And that's life in America.
Right.
But also when I started to work and travel in Europe, because whatever, people don't think I am the stereotypical Black person, people wouldn't believe I was American sometimes. They're like, oh, she's from England, she's from whatever. And I'm like, do I sound English to you?
Right.
Because they don't know that Black people like us exist, which is crazy.
Wow.
So it's really deep. It's really deep.
I dig it. I do have to ask because you said so. Is Afro punk and Black punk, are they different?
You mean Afro punk as a genre?
Right, as a
Or
culture,
as
as a genre.
a
I'm not the event, but
right.
In your answer, you said like everyone is not
Well,
Afro.
because unfortunately, and I think James would agree, Afropunk as an idea has become something so far removed from the original mission that if you say Afropunk to a non-person in the community, they think glamorous Essence Fest. They don't think punks. They don't think DIY grassroots, independent young bands. They think something totally different. So I don't even like to use it as a description, to be honest. I feel like it's lazy. There's also some political pain behind why we don't use it, just because of what it became. Black punk now is, I'm really spacing on this. It's a play on, and I can't quote Chris and James as to why they named it this, but it reminds me of like a play on the beatnik era when there would be these community books and pressings and manuals and brochures about what was happening on the street.
Right.
Like, oh, you want to talk about Black punk? Well, this is Black punk now. Because up until now, if you say Black punk, people only know Bad Brains and they know Fishbone, Living Color, all the people we love. And they're just now really starting to love Death, the band, and Bam Bam. But that's it. Unless if they're not in the community or in the scene or invested in the culture, there's a limit to what people can visualize when you say Black punk.
Right.
So to have this anthology where it's all kinds of people, straight, queer, gay, however you identify, women, mixed ages, there are people making zines, there are people writing sci-fi, there are people writing stories like mine, there are illustrators, people interviewing each other. There's also an interview that Lena Dawes did, she wrote the heavy metal book, Why Are You Here? She interviewed the Sistagrrls. No one's ever interviewed all four of us before. She's the
Wow.
first one, a Black woman. So
Wow.
there's such an array of different ways to be Black and punk in this anthology. Nardwuar gave a copy to Doichi. When I saw that, I was like, okay, people know who we are now. Right
Right.
on. And it's not about fame, it's about the next generation feeling like it's okay to be yourself.
Right.
That's literally it for me. Like, I don't need people stopping me on the street, but I want to see a Black girl in my neighborhood skateboarding and feel like nobody's going to mess with her. And I'm starting to see that now, 30 years later.
Right.
So to me, that's what it's about.
Well, I have to ask you to come back another time so we can talk about skateboarding and maxes and everything.
I would love to.
Oh, thank you. Great folk. Oh, and you know what? You have to come back so we can also talk about the connection of blues and punk. Now,
Yes.
my baby girl that you met loves punk rock, and I'm a bluesman. I play blues, and I'm like, baby, what you doing? And she said,
Yep.
well, Dad, you said everything comes from the blues. This is my blues. And I was like, I couldn't say anything.
Right. She got you.
She got me big time. But we're going to talk about that too, and quite a few things. But I just want to thank you for taking some time and rapping with me. And yeah, tell the good folk where they can find you and all the great stuff that you're doing.
Oh, sure. You can find me at honeychildcoleman.com. I also have music on Spotify and Bandcamp. Bandcamp preferred because nobody else pays artists. Real talk. On Instagram, you can find me at the 1865 Band or HC Coleman.
Dig it. Well, again, and is that the website right there?
Perfect.
All right, good folk. You heard it here. Probably not first, but you heard it here. Don't forget, keep bluesing. Always, 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 always talk to your mama, your daddy, your grandmama, whoever is in your family you can get to, and keep the story of your peoples going, and pick up an instrument. We will see. That's right. We'll see you at a later date.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
You are so welcome.